Welcome to the Third Sector podcast, brought to you by the Third Sector editorial team. In this episode, we'll be considering the implications of Sir Keir Starmer's departure for the voluntary sector. We'll be examining the situation currently facing charity retail. And we'll be taking stock on the developing situation at City and Guilds 8 months on from the sale of its training and awards arm and some questionable bonuses. I'm your host, Lucinda Rouse, and I'm joined by Emily Burt.
Hello.
Andy Ricketts.
Hello.
And Dami Adewale.
Hello.
This is our monthly episode where we don't have a guest joining us. It takes the form of an editorial team meeting in which we consider a few recent stories that have raised some interesting points. And we're going to start with Emily, arguably with the biggest story of the month from number 10.
Well, yeah, I mean, it feels such a long time ago now. That adage about a week being a long time in politics feels so well worn now. I'm almost bored of it. But the long and the short of it is that we are now looking at our 7th Prime Minister in 7 years after Keir Starmer announced that he was going to resign from his post on Monday last week. The pressure from MPs became insurmountable, and he's decided that for the good of the country, he now has to stand down. So we now have Andy Burnham as the heir apparent for the Labour government. He's already making barnstorming speeches. He's apparently going to live in Manchester. He's, going to create a number 10 of the North powerhouse. And I think it raises a real question about the future of both the Civil Society Covenant and the Council. This was a co-design project. I'm sure that there were plenty of people in government who fed into it, but certainly from where I was sitting, this really felt like a bit of a Keir Starmer passion project. Keir Starmer was the person who formally launched the Covenant, promising that it was going to give charities a home at the heart of government. He joined that first meeting of the Civil Society Council when that took place in April this year. I would argue that he's been a much more public-facing figure, government figure, around this work than, say, the Charities Minister Stephanie Peacock, for example, who's been on more of a backseat perhaps, or certainly I haven't seen her coming out and making big statements about the role of civil society and government working in partnership, despite being the charity minister. And after that meeting of the Civil Society Council in April this year, Matt Hyde, who is the chief executive of Lloyds Bank Foundation and who is sitting on the council, described the meeting as early days, but a very good start. And I think this is my problem, or I think this is the thing that has to give us pause, because the reality is we are still in those early days. It's only 2 months since the first Civil Society Council met. And now the Prime Minister is going, and we're going to have a reset again. We're going to have a reshuffle, I would imagine. It's really hard to see how this great reset for the world of government and the world of charity is going to play out when the government itself feels like it's stuck in a cycle of being permanently reset. We're talking a lot at the moment about the various devices that trap charities in short-term cycles, whether that is project-based funding or having to constantly, reapply for leases because prices are going up. I think we need to think in an even broader way about the ways that our society is becoming increasingly short-termist itself. And I think these briefer and briefer political cycles are becoming a really important part of that. The structural problems that charities are trying to address are long-term, and they require sustained work and sustained partnership. Obviously, I don't work in the sector. I don't have these government partnerships, but it must be difficult if you spend 2 years developing a relationship, a trusted relationship with someone who you think has political clout and policy clout and could make some big changes for you, only to find that suddenly they're out on their ear.
I wonder if it will make charities who have a really strong campaigning focus think twice about, is this really the best use of our resource, developing these relationships, spending staff time on this, when it's all going to be out the window in another year or two?
That's the question, I think. And there are certainly some leaders of charities that I've spoken to in the last 12 months who have expressed that they feel like they have no home within government now, and no home really in the opposition either. And they feel it's getting harder and harder to get through the door, to build those relationships with politicians, partly I think because we are seeing the general rhetoric in this country moving towards the right. I think there is perhaps less of an appetite now than there would have been 10 years ago for working with charities and supporting some of those causes that charities champion. But I think there's also a personnel issue. And it's very hard to keep those relationships strong if you are having to kind of go back to ground zero and reset kind of every couple of years.
I take your point on the churn and how unhelpful that is. But is it really the case that we are going further towards the right? Yes, there is certainly that political momentum outside of government, but we have a Labour government. They've been in for coming up to 2 years now. We've heard time and again from sector leaders that they're so relieved that this government is so much more open and so much more receptive to working with charities, to engaging and taking on the views of charities who are experts in the field in which they're working. So it will be interesting to see the extent to which that is disrupted by a change in premiership, and whether the whole spirit of government working with civil society is really broken. I don't think it is.
I don't think it's broken. I think that's not the point I'm making. And of course, it's brilliant that charities have felt supported by this government and do feel like there are constructive relationships there. Long may that last. My point is more that there might be key people who are in ministerial posts who have been that supportive force for that relationship, who are now not going to be in that post anymore. Now, hopefully there will be continuity and that will be handed over. My point about the kind of more right-wing argument is not about this government as such. It's more about, we have this rising tide of reform happening. We are now seeing reform are controlling a greater degree of local authorities after local elections. I don't think there is going to be a general election anytime soon, but there are people who are now saying Andy Burnham has no mandate. He's not the prime minister that the country elected. And it's exactly the same conversation that happened when, say, Rishi Sunak became the prime minister. It's going to be a challenge for Labour. And I don't think that you can understate the pressure that groups like Reform and maybe less so Restore Britain are having on the electorate. So, I'm taking kind of a broader view here. But as you say, kind of that churn in the short term is certainly not, I would imagine, very helpful.
Yeah.
I think one thing to bear in mind, though, is that obviously Starmer has been the main driving force behind this covenant as a figurehead for it. And I was there in the room for that event that you referenced when Starmer, as the leader of the opposition at that point, set out this plan for the covenant. It wasn't called the covenant then, but he just set out his pitch to the voluntary sector, and all these other shadow ministers were there, and there was obviously a lot of excitement from charities in terms of finally being recognised after years of being kicked around by the Conservative government. I think, though, we've seen some of these almost like pet projects from leaders. I mean, David Cameron had the National Citizen Service.
Big society.
Exactly. Starmer has got the covenant as one of these things, but what we shouldn't forget is that although the leadership might change and the vision might change, a lot of the officials won't. And I think that people who are on the Civil Society Council, for example, and others in the major infrastructure bodies, they're going to be building up relationships with those officials, and those will probably remain to a large degree. I mean, we're assuming that Andy Burnham's going to be the leader at this point. It would be very surprising if that isn't the case. And we don't really know anything about his views on the covenant and where it might go under him. But I think there will definitely be a certain degree of business as usual once he comes in with regard to the covenant, at least. It's just a question of how much focus it has. And that's the thing that it could definitely lose. And with it being a voluntary agreement, there's no statutory force behind it. If there's no political commitment to it, it's probably going to struggle to make any effect.
In the small number of conversations that I've had with charity leaders since Keir Starmer stepped down and Andy Burnham came steaming into Euston on his delayed Avanti train, a lot of the conversations that I have had about Andy Burnham have broadly been quite positive. Some charity leaders have said that they've worked with him before, they find him very good. Hopefully he'll be a real positive force for the Covenant and for the sector as well. He's already announced that he's going to donate 15% of his MP's salary to local causes around Makerfield. He founded the Greater Manchester Mayors Charity that's been working to address homelessness and rough sleeping in Manchester since 2017. He's still a founding patron of that organisation. He's also a patron of Compassion in Action, which is another local charity that meets the needs of people in crisis with provision of things like furniture and accommodation and advocacy. So he might be fantastic. Maybe Andy Burnham is the best thing that's ever going to happen for the Civil Society Covenant.
Matt Downey, Chief Exec of Crisis, did a keynote at our conference last week, and he let on that he has found Andy Burnham to be one of the best political leaders on homelessness he's ever met. But then Matt also pointed out that the financial conditions he will face are the same as the last 7 prime ministers.
So all to play for, really. And I guess in the next months, the months to come, it's really going to be for the council members to continue to fly the flag for the voluntary sector, to continue to try and make sure they're getting that face time with the new government as it finds its feet, and hopefully to keep those relationships going. It's going to be another moment of turbulence. Hopefully the sector will come out of it even stronger. We'll just be watching to see how all that unfolds.
Andy, what story are you bringing to the table this week?
Well, we're looking at charity shops. Lucinda, there's been a lot of stuff that we've written in recent months about charity shops. And just recently, the British Heart Foundation became the latest charity or major charity retailer to announce a big change to its retail operation when they said they're going to close about 150 of its shops between now and April 2027, which is almost a quarter of the stores it operates. The BHF is the biggest individual charity retailer in the UK, and it comes off the back of Cancer Research UK being in the process of closing 200 stores around the UK between now and April 2027. Bernardo's closing 45 stores last year. Scope closed about half of its 140 odd stores last year as well. So there's a massive change going on in charity retail.
What are the reasons behind it?
Well, I think a lot of them are quite well established. I mean, it's becoming more expensive, first and foremost, to run a charity shop, not least wages being more expensive with the minimum wage and the national insurance contribution increase, but also energy costs are obviously a major factor. And just the cost of doing things like getting rid of rag is changing because there was a big drop in prices for recycled goods. So if charities want to sell off bags of stuff they can't sell, they get a lesser return for it. And also, obviously, shopping habits are changing. I mean, you just walk down any high street these days and you'll see probably quite a few empty stores because footfall in the high street has changed and people are not shopping in the same way that they used to. So all these things are creating quite a big challenge for charity retailers.
Yes, and you echo an observation made by Conservative MP Andrew Griffith, who put charity shops in the same basket as vape stores as a sign of a declining high street. He got quite a backlash to that, didn't he?
Well, yeah, Robin Osterley, probably understandably from the Charity Retail Association, immediately snapped back at what Griffith said. And I mean, it's been an often kind of wheeled out cliche that charity shops are lowering the standard of the high street, but I think it's nonsense, to be honest. I mean, a lot of charity shops you go in these days, they're busy, vibrant places.
It's interesting what you say there, Andy, because I was just thinking in terms of like the e-commerce patterns that we've seen in the past few years and the kind of rise of platforms like Vinted and Depop. So that obviously could affect the footfall at charity shops as well. Yeah,
and it's also affecting the donations because, now if people have got a second-hand top, they think they might be able to get £3.50 for on Vinted, they might be tempted to do that rather than donate it. So obviously it is affecting donations, but also charities are taking advantage of things like Vinted and Depop and selling their own items through that and engaging with a new audience by using those platforms. So the British Heart Foundation is apparently the world's largest charity retailer on eBay, has sold millions of items on that, and it gives them the opportunity to put something in front of a whole new audience that it wouldn't have if it just put it in its store in Eastleigh or wherever it might be. So it can be an opportunity for charities as well as being a bit of a threat, and I think charities need to engage with it in a positive way rather than looking at it negatively.
Do we have any insight into how that's going for particularly the big charities? Obviously, we've been covering the news of all these hundreds and hundreds of charity shops closing. Is that due to a strategic pivot and representative of continuing strong growth, or are things really looking bad for retail?
Well, I think one of the things about running a major charity operation is it's expensive. And the returns that you get at the end of the year are relatively small on the money that you spent. So, for example, the British Heart Foundation in 2024-25 spent something like £230 million on its retail operation. The profit on that was about £3 million. So obviously that's a vast expense, and it's a huge operation. You're employing hundreds of people. You've got hundreds of shops around the UK. It's vast and complex and expensive to run for a relatively small return. So I think this is probably why charities are thinking about how they need to refocus their retail operations to make sure that the shops that are most profitable are the ones that they're really putting the focus on, because those are the ones that are going to earn the money.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit more about the superstores.
That is an interesting development because some of the larger charities are putting more time and resources into those larger stores. So Cancer Research is closing 200 of its small stores, but it's also going to add to the 12 superstores that it already operates. Oxfam is in the process of opening 10 additional superstores around the UK by 2029. And part of this is just due to the fact that the figures show that people who go to these often out of town, maybe empty sort of ex-retail units, are spending more time in those locations. And they're also, crucially, spending more money. It also acts as a good opportunity for people to connect with the charity's mission, because some of them might have a cafe in there, so they spend more time. They might find out a bit more about the charity. They might be tempted to look into what the charity does and engage with it in a more meaningful way than if they just pop in for 2 minutes off the high street and then run out again empty-handed. So it's a fairly limited, I would say, type of charity that can do this, because obviously it's quite expensive in the first place to get one of these massive outlets. So you probably need to be a pretty big charity. I'm guessing that the local sort of hospice that might run maybe 1 or 2 charity shops is not going to be going down this route because it just won't be viable. But for some of these bigger charities, it's definitely something they're exploring.
So not an entirely dismal picture, but definitely signs of evolution and pivoting underway.
It's definitely not a dismal picture. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. But yeah, there is definitely signs that charities are changing the way they operate their retail operations in response to changing public demand.
Dami, your story is a second instalment of an issue that we have discussed previously on the podcast, and where we very much left it as watch this space. It will be interesting to see what happens. What's the story?
Yeah, so a lot has happened since our last time discussing the situation at City and Guilds in February. For a quick recap, the City and Guilds of London Institute, a Royal Chartered educational charity, sold its training and awards arm in October to a Greek language certification company called PeopleSet. The CGLI said it would retain around 180 to 200 million in gross assets, and it would transfer out 1,400 staff, leaving only 12, and the new organisation would be called City and Guilds Limited. The CGLI said its commercial activities in the training and awards field require significant investment, so with the development of AI and technology, trustees believe they wouldn't be able to keep up in the field.
Sounds sensible. So where did the controversy lie?
There were concerns raised in January about a possible restructure and bonus payments awarded to Kirsty Donnelly, the charity's chief exec, and Abid Ismail, the chief financial officer. The senior executives reportedly paid themselves 1.7 million and 1.2 million respectively in bonuses and were put on leave when the concerns were initially raised. The restructure concerns were raised by Tom Bewick, an educational consultant and professor, who said in a Substack article earlier this year that up to a third of the jobs could be offshore to Greece, where costs are up to 50% lower. And Bewick also said in January that more than 300 jobs were at immediate risk of redundancy. The Charity Commission subsequently opened an inquiry into City and Guilds in January and said it would look into the concerns I just mentioned.
So these concerns that were raised in the Substack article, were they founded?
That's really interesting because that kind of moves on to the PeopleCert independent investigation findings. Since our previous podcast, PeopleCert published the findings of its internal investigation into the sale. The investigation actually found that Donnelly and Ishmael paid unauthorized bonuses totaling about 5 million to themselves and 60 staff as part of the sale.
So that's the 1.2 and 1.7 million that you mentioned before.
Yes, that's correct.
And a few more to make up around 5 million.
Yeah, quite hefty figures. And in a statement, PeopleCert also revealed that Donnelly and Ishmael were dismissed in April for gross misconduct without financial settlement following a disciplinary process. The company said it was seeking to recover the 2.9 million awarded to Donnelly and Ishmael as well.
And have we heard anything from the Charity Commission yet?
No, we haven't heard anything from the Commission yet. I contacted them recently and they said the inquiry was ongoing. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to say.
So essentially, these investigations do confirm suspicions that the sale of a charitable asset entity was done in really, really shady circumstances, and that these two senior execs were just able to pay themselves over £2 million between them.
Actually close to £3 million. And it's just interesting thinking about it from a governance and just a background check perspective. How was this allowed to happen in such a way that the bonus payments were allowed to go through to just two people and they were allowed to funnel them down to different employees as well? It's just really interesting.
And that's without any kind of authorisation from the board or from PeopleCert, who had bought City and Guilds at the time. So
you just sort of wonder what trustees knew at that point, what they were being told and to what involvement they had. I mean, probably very little. I imagine they were probably being kept at arm's length as much as possible, because you imagine that your average trustee wouldn't have agreed to that if they knew that that was being offered to the top two people in the organisation.
The investigation also found that salary increases for the executive leadership team and other staff were made without formal authorisation from the City and Guilds Limited Board or PeopleCert. PeopleCert concluded that recipients of the 60 bonus payments to other staff were neither fully aware of nor instrumental in the scheme as well.
Why is this story important from a charity perspective?
If you look at it from a charity perspective, I mean, I think Neil Bates, a City and Guilds fellow and a part of the City and Guilds Action Group, which we'll speak about soon, he said that questions have been raised about potential breaches of charity law, failures of fiduciary duty, and actions inconsistent with the City and Guilds constitution. So I'm not really sure how this was allowed to happen, considering it goes against the actual constitution of the charity.
And I wonder if there will be any implications for what remains of City and Guilds, still a massive organisation. Is there going to be any knock-on effect for them? Presumably they will just want it all to go away. What does it mean for them?
Well, that's the second part of the City and Guilds situation, isn't it? Because there has been a request for another independent inquiry into the sale, separate from the PeopleCert investigation and the Charity Commission investigation. The request was put forward in March by the City and Guilds Action Group, which includes City and Guilds members, fellows and former staff. Members of the City and Guilds of London Institute voted in favour of the inquiry in April, and the charity announced last month that an inquiry led by a King's Counsel will be launched soon.
What a mess.
Yeah. And it's just another one of those stories that, I don't think this is going to quite catch the imagination of the public in the same way that maybe like the Captain Tom saga did, or some of the other big charity scandals that we've seen. But it's not a good look for a charity if they're paying bonuses of £3 million to two top people. It just doesn't look good from a public perception of the way that charities work, and it just kind of more fuel to the fire to the people who say, oh, charity leaders are just fat cats all in it for themselves, which we know is not true in 99.9% of the cases. But this is one of those isolated incidents that just highlights what happens when things go wrong.
Certainly not a story that you'll be taking your eye off for a while, Dami.
No, absolutely not. I've written 10 stories about it already this year, so I'm looking forward to writing some more, actually.
Well, that's it for our team discussion this month. But we do also have a housekeeping note at the end of this podcast. As the sun goes down on Keir Starmer's premiership at Third Sector, we're also preparing to say farewell to one of our own leading lights. After 4 fantastic years at the helm of the Third Sector podcast, we are very sad to be bidding a fond goodbye to our host, Lucinda Rouse, who is moving on into a new role on another Haymarket Media title, Campaign UK.
Tomorrow, in fact, is going to feel extremely strange because I will still be able to see you. In fact, I will still be within 5 meters of the third sector desks, but I will no longer be part of the team and working on charity sector stories. It has been such a huge honour to have been the most constant host, not the only host, the most constant host of the Third Sector podcast for the best part of 4 years. And I've absolutely loved it. We've got through just over 200 episodes.
Wow.
And you might have thought that it would be difficult to come up with ideas for a different topic or a different guest every single week, but it really hasn't. And I think that says a lot about the beat that we cover and about civil society and the charity world that we are all part of. I certainly didn't know a great deal about the voluntary sector when I joined Third Sector in 2022. I definitely knew a lot more about it than I know about the advertising space, which is what I'm going on to cover tomorrow. But that's really not saying very much. And just the privilege of being able to interview people from all corners of the sector and hear firsthand about the work they do, about their successes, about their challenges, is surely the best way that anybody could possibly learn about the third sector.
Well, I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say, Lucinda, that you have absolutely transformed the podcast in your time at Third Sector, not only bringing in that wealth of amazing guests, but taking your roving microphones to offices around the country, including the RNLI offices down in Poole, one of your favourite spots, I think, and your deft interviewing style, which has brought so many great stories to our door. And of course, it would be remiss to not also mention the award-winning documentary series that you created for Third Sector, The End of Charity, and When Charity Goes Wrong. So if you have, listening, enjoyed any of our episodes or any of the series that have come out since September 2022, then you should know that Lucinda had a leading hand in every one of those. You're going to be so very deeply missed by all of us, although we are, of course, wishing you every success on your new adventure.
Well, I'm very glad that we're not yet a video podcast because I am blushing furiously. But if you're a regular listener, you will hear from me a couple more times over the summer because we have just a couple of pre-recorded episodes in the bank that will be released over the course of the next couple of months. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Emily, Dami and Andy will be back with another team meeting at the end of the month. But for now, from me and from all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Jude Owen.